Welcome to Gun Autism Season 1. This little video is a mashup of all 10 Gun Autism shorts to get you up to speed on where the series is. Gun Autism has been an idea in the back of my mind for some time now to try and express my love for firearms. I'm by no means an expert on the matter, but I hyper-focus on interesting facts and tidbits that I thought many others would find fun as well. And so far, with the success of Season 1, I'd say I'm doing alright. You can skip this next part here. I won't even be offended if you do. But hear me out. I don't take sponsorships as frequently anymore to try and keep the value of entertainment the same. YouTube is my full-time job. I have a mortgage and 2 cats to support. I stream full-time and have videos on my channel as normal for anyone to watch. Along with that, Gun Autism's animation, writing, and voicing take some time to get right, including understanding the facts of the weapons themselves. I'd really appreciate it if you could support me on Patreon, or try some gamer subs using code JFJ at checkout for 10% off anything in the store. I have my own flavor called JFJ brand snake oil that tastes like apple pie. If you can't, that's totally fine. Subscribing and liking the video, and even commenting what I get wrong so I can learn for next time, is more than enough to help this channel and series expand more than it has. I appreciate your consideration in hearing me out, and I hope you'll enjoy my Gun Autism. A famous gunslinger move in many Western forms of media is fanning the hammer. Fanning the hammer is a unique move on a unique era of revolvers that requires accuracy, strength, and endurance. In order to fan the hammer, you must hold the trigger on a single-action revolver, then pull back and let go of the hammer. By constantly holding the trigger, the hammer has no release check, allowing the cylinder to rotate with each pull and fire with each release. The hammer is the most important part of the weapon. It controls the cylinder rotation and the ignition of the primer. The trigger merely releases the hammer. If the hammer isn't pulled back and the trigger is pulled, nothing's gonna happen. That is how single actions work. In double actions, the hammer can be pulled, but so can the trigger. However, the trigger is in main control. Fanning the hammer isn't possible on double action revolvers due to less emphasis and importance placed on the hammer. So holding down the trigger and fanning the hammer won't yield any results. So remember, if you see any modern revolver fanning the hammer, just know it's impossible. And I hope you've enjoyed my Gun Autism. You don't need to pump your shotguns every time you reload. Pump-action shotguns don't use loaded magazines or clips, they use attached internal magazine tubes and shells. Shotguns have an attached tube underneath the barrel that holds their shells. What's interesting about this design is that you're able to add shells to the tube without having to reload entirely. Pulling back the pump, loading a shell into the receiver, then pushing the pump forward loads the gun into ready to fire. Now you can load the required amount of shells into the tube port until it's full. Pulling back the pump ejects a shell from the receiver, pulls a shell from the tube in one motion, then pushing forwards loads the shell into the barrel into ready. As long as there are shells in the tube, pumping the shotgun will make it ready to fire. You only have to pump the gun once you fired it. If the gun wasn't fired, there isn't a reason to pump it unless it's empty. So remember, every form of media that pumps the shotgun when it's ready to go, they just threw away a live round. And I hope you've enjoyed my Gun Autism. Well, actually, hold on. Firearms have protected and helped people for as long as they've been around, but misuse and abuse have also hurt people as well. Before I teach you more about random gun tips, I'd be happier knowing y'all also knew how to treat a firearm. Here are 5 rules that are used to make sure you all know what you're doing. Never point it at something you aren't going to destroy. Treat it as if it's loaded. Check, check, and check again. It's a tool, not a toy. It deserves respect. Finger off the trigger unless you're going to fire. And the most important rule is have fun. In the last Gun Autism, I broke Rule 5. I flagged the cameraman. While the gun was unloaded, I still could have put someone in danger. Luckily, these are animations and not real life. It's still a weapon and it deserves respect. I hope you've enjoyed my Gun Autism. Clips are not magazines. You are most likely never going to go to a store to purchase any modern firearm that uses clips. Magazines are containers with a strong spring at the bottom that pushes up against the opening to help feed rounds into the loading mechanism to be fired from a barrel. Clips are small little strips that essentially hold many rounds in place for the user to push them into the firearm when removed. More than likely, if a weapon uses a clip, it has an internal magazine that does the loading for you that allows input from the user to cycle rounds. Bolt actions are an example of this. Clips are actually entirely optional, as you can load weapons that require clips by hand 1 bullet at a time instead of a clip. Weapons we use in modern wartime and even some we use in hunting do not use clips. Unless a weapon is hand-loaded 1 bullet at a time, it more than likely doesn't use a clip. We have essentially phased out clips entirely as the loading alternative. Magazines are easier to use, swap, and contain the ammo safely. End blocks are a different conversation for another time, so try not to mix those up anymore. And thanks for listening to my
Gun Autism.
I'm Jay.
And I'm Zach.
Silencers and suppressors are the same thing. Silencer was the original term, but eventually people started calling them suppressors. In fact, suppressors and silencers aren't silent at all. Obviously, they're not as loud as an unsuppressed gunshot, but the idea that they make no noise or just a small pew sound is science fiction.
When a gun is fired, the hammer strikes the primer on a bullet, igniting the gunpowder, which releases a small explosion, sending out gases and pressure at a quick speed. However, the loudness of a gun comes from those gases escaping the barrel at such high speed that it creates the boom of a gunshot. These gases push the bullet down the barrel. Attaching a suppressor to the barrel allows these gases to be captured, cooled, and released in a much less explosive fashion. Like a car muffler, it allows the loud noise to be reduced to a smaller boom, but it can never totally remove it. In fact, the car muffler and the first silencer were designed by the same person.
Silencer might be the original name, but suppressor is a more accurate name for the suppression of the gases, not silencing them. Hope that clears up any questions, and thanks for listening to our Gun Autism. There's all sorts of different types of ammo or ammunition that alternate their viability towards what they're specifically being aimed at. For example, here are two cartridges. One of them is FMJ, or Full Metal Jacket, and the other is Hollow Point. Full Metal Jacket is a solid lead core based round that is thick throughout the bullet with a hard outer shell, or jacket, that covers the core. FMJ rounds have less chances to expand on impact, and a higher chance to penetrate the target like a solid round. Hollow point cartridges are rounds that on impact expand greatly and quickly, focusing primarily on unarmored targets that aren't wearing a form of protection. This bullet has less penetration overall, but does more damage on the entry wound due to the bullet basically exploding into shrapnel on impact. Fun fact, these rounds are a violation of the Geneva Convention by definition. However, the United States never fully agreed to ratifying the prohibition. The clause clearly states expanding bullets, which Hollow Point's description fits. I hope you learned something, and thanks for listening to my Gun Autism. Shotguns have a notoriously vast history of use, all throughout multiple forms of combative engagement. Examples include when the Germans complained about the use of shotguns in war since the wounds were either so severe or spread out that saving the soldier was deemed almost impossible. Well, stop using so much chlorine gas then, Jerry! Popular shotgun from that same era was the M1897, also known as the trench shotgun. This shotgun was incredibly good at clearing trenches, incorporating a method called slam firing. When this shotgun is fired, you pump it normally, but like with fanning the hammer, holding down the trigger allowed the next cycled round to be fired immediately when ready, allowing the shotgun to go through its entire tube extremely quick. Most shotguns today can just be semi-auto to circumvent this method, but man is it cool. I hope you learned something, and thanks for listening to my Gun Autism. A common cool-looking Western movie trope is spinning a revolver. But did you know? This trope was completely safe, and still is if prepped correctly. On single-action revolvers, the hammer does all the work. When it's pulled back, it turns the cylinder and cocks it into ready. Pulling the trigger releases the hammer and hits the primer. But if the hammer isn't pulled back, the trigger won't do anything, allowing you to safely pull it as much as you want, enabling anyone to spin the weapon at their leisure. However, there is an issue. The hammer sitting directly on top of a live round can be dangerous, as a sudden strike to the hammer can ignite the primer. Utilizing a tactic called cowboy loading, where the hammer sits on an empty chamber, allows complete safety from any form of misfire since there's no round in the way. By simply pulling back the hammer, you'll cycle the cylinder to the next round, allowing you to safely spin the gun and fire it. I hope you learned something, and thanks for listening to my Gun Autism. The Winchester 1873 repeating rifle is the gun that won the West. Chambered in .44 or .40 and later to other cartridges, this repeating rifle is a marvel of its time and still reproduced today. With a standard 24-inch barrel, an impressive 12 cartridges can be loaded, sometimes more, even weighing a paltry 9 pounds when full. Pulling the lever down simultaneously pushes back the hammer, ejects a spent casing, and extracts a new cartridge from the tube. Pulling the lever up cycles the next cartridge into ready. Thanks to the ingenuity of this rifle, if you've got sleight of hand and good aim, you can repeat this process as quick as your hands can move. Doing this quick enough is a technique called levering. I hope you learned something, and thanks for listening to my Gun Autism. I'm Jay.
And I'm Zach.
The Spaz 12 shotgun is an Italian-made shotgun that has incredible media representation and misrepresentation. The Spaz 12 can be fired in semi-auto for high brass shells and reliable pump action mode for low-grain, low-pressure shells. With a tube of 8 rounds plus 1 loaded, this shotgun is a marvel in not only its design, but its lethality.
But in terms of reliability, it's rather inconsistent. The Spaz 12 requires a special button to be pressed in order to load shells into it. While not too obtrusive, it is an extra step in the reload process, which can be quite cumbersome, especially considering that the Spaz 12 weighs a staggering 9.7 pounds empty. Because it was designed for full power buckshot or slug rounds, it can be pretty picky about what ammo you feed through it. And these shotguns are at least 20 years old, which definitely takes its toll on the reliability of most weapons.
Despite the Spaz 12 being considered a top-shelf shotgun,
the only thing top shelf seems to be the price.
thanks for listening to our